Hello, Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday webinar. My name is Kevin Marhoney, and I'm the host of the series. Joining me today is Robert Lovelace, one of our fantastic solution architects. He's prepared a presentation here for you, taking a look at Coretek's Azure Management Suite. It's our own proprietary solution, and he also has a demo prepared that he will be showing as part of that presentation. But before I hand it over to Robert to jump into the meat of today's presentation, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out both a copy of the recording and the slide deck for your convenience. That way, whether you're here and want to refer back to it, or if you're watching all of this on demand, you'll have reference to both resources to consume at your leisure. Also, we will be taking questions, so I just put here inside of the Q&A. You can go ahead and feel free to submit any questions there, and towards the end of the webinar, we will go ahead and answer any questions that get submitted through there. Of course, if you're watching this on demand and you have any questions, you can, of course, feel free to reach out to us through our website, or you can email us at inquiry@coretek.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions for anybody who is watching this webinar on demand. Without any further ado, though, that takes care of all the housekeeping stuff. So, Robert, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to walk through the presentation you prepared for today.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And good afternoon, everybody. This is Robert Lovelace with Coretek, and I'm excited to share a little bit about how we achieve Azure governance with Coretek's AMS tool. So to dive in, what we're going to talk through today is I'll do a brief little introduction of myself. Then we'll talk about the cloud adoption framework. And for a lot of our customers, where we initially encounter discussing Azure policy and Azure governance is during the cloud adoption framework. So we'll kind of cover what the cloud adoption framework involves, and then discuss what we're trying to achieve. And it's really creating balance within our Azure environment around governance and establishing policies and our baselines, but not reducing our ability to grow and deploy. And then we get into the governance model and some of the Azure native tools that you can leverage to achieve cloud governance. And then we'll show you the Coretek AMS suite and how you can leverage the AMS suite to monitor, review, and maintain that baseline of governance in Azure. And then we'll follow it with any questions that you guys might have. So for a quick introduction, like I said, Robert Lovelace, Solutions Architect with our Azure practice here at Coretek. I've been with Coretek for about 7.5 years. Came out of our managed service practice. So I've spent a number of years as a delivery manager, helping develop and work with our CSP customers from the beginning of Coretek becoming a CSP, and really understanding their needs and gaps that they have in supporting and managing, but also understanding where we can offset some of their key resources from having to care and maintain their current environment so that they can focus on evolving the business, whether it's a SaaS application or just workloads into how their application may change, moving it into platform as a service from an IaaS, for example. So let's dive in. Let's take a look at the cloud adoption framework. So establishing governance, really first we encounter it during the cloud adoption framework. And the cloud adoption framework is a widely used term, and it's something that it's a Microsoft engagement, and really we break down the cloud migration during the beginning as there's the assessment phase, and as part of that assessment phase, we're trying to understand the total cost of ownership for your Azure environment, or for I'm sorry, not your Azure environment, but your on-prem environment, and what it would cost for this to run in Azure. And we can look at workloads and their readiness to move to the cloud. In the cloud adoption framework, we've made a decision that we're going to start moving workloads to Azure. Maybe it's starting with backups are being sent up to Azure. Maybe it's setting up business continuity with DR. in Azure, or maybe it's that first workload into Azure. But regardless, when we're talking about setting up a tenant and subscription, we need to make sure that we're thinking of Azure as a data center. And just like you would put standards within your data center on-prem, and you set up your policy, naming conventions, role-based access, IP schema, we want to make sure that we're taking that same approach and those same standards into Azure with us. And that's where the Cloud Adoption Framework really helps us as Coretek understand what you guys have for these standards today, and how we can achieve those standards in Azure. And like I said, there's a number of native tools to help us achieve those standards. So the governance really is in the planning stage, is where we're discussing and uncovering what you're doing and making sure that we're establishing a plan for how we achieve that in Azure. And then the ready stage is the deployment of that plan that's identified in the plan stage. So there's a lot, and you'll see the govern and manage along the bottom, is because ultimately governing your Azure environment, much like governing your on-prem environment, is there's no destination. It's an evolving journey, and management is the same way. So that's the Cloud Adoption Framework. And then, like I said earlier, so it's creating that balance. So there's the control and stability, and then results and speed. So we want to make sure that we understand we're creating a stable environment, and we have controls in place with our policy and our baseline standards that we have for our naming conventions and IP schema, like I said earlier. And then we also have, we're enabling our team for speed and results. So we want to make sure that whatever policy we put in place is done with tools, so that the team can deploy VMs, and the policy is making sure that those VMs are following these standards. So it's really important to make sure that we're enabling our team during deployment and ongoing management, and not just creating a burden for the team to manage and work with. So that leads us into the governance model. So really, it breaks down into 5 disciplines of cloud governance. I like to refer to them as pillars of cloud governance. There's cost management, security baseline, resource consistency, identity baseline, and deployment acceleration. So cost management is really understanding cost and how we're spending or consuming Azure. This is really important because it is a real fear for some organizations, is they don't fully understand, and for a CFO, they don't fully understand how do they limit, or how do they know what they're spending in Azure. And I'm really excited to show you how the AMS tool can address cost management. We also make recommendations through the AMS tool for reducing cost, but we can also set budgets for resource groups or subscriptions, so that you know where you're at all times according to the budget that we have set. Security baseline. So there are a number of compliances templates built into Azure that are offering. So if you guys are held to HIPAA compliance, you can leverage the base HIPAA compliance policy template for your environment, and it will make recommendations to make sure that you're within HIPAA compliances, or if it's NIST, you can leverage the NIST compliances template. So it's understanding those tools and applying them to your subscription. Resource consistency. So this is sometimes overlooked, and it's a great methodology and approach to deploying resources in Azure. Rather than rebuilding a commonly deployed resource, it's all about creating a template. And whether you're using Terraform and infrastructure as code, or just leveraging an Azure blueprint, or another template tool to deploy those resources. It's all about creating that base template and deploying based from a template rather than a net new build. Identity baseline is really focused on role-based access and naming conventions. So all VMs follow a standard naming convention for infrastructure identity and IP schema, and then also role-based access. So making sure that users that are getting into the environment are being assigned the proper access so that they're not getting additional access into any aspects of the environment that are beyond what is needed or required of them. And then deployment acceleration really spans across a number of the previous pillars. So by the time you have your security baseline established with policy and resource consistency established, your deployment acceleration really starts to take off because you're deploying again from templates and everything is standardized across the entire environment. It allows you to deploy and expand workloads into new regions or create a new subset of applications or databases very quickly and seamlessly. The general theme here across all of this is really enabling your team with tools to achieve each of these areas and not putting it on them as an additional burden to necessarily follow or holding them to these restrictions or baseline by just memory or document and process, but actual tools that are implementing and withholding that documented process. The next piece is really taking those 5 pillars of governance and showing the Azure native tools that help you achieve them. So I know we talked about it, but the cost management, and you'll see that the top 2 here are really across almost every single pillar, and that's Azure Blueprints and policy. So we can set policy that covers all 5 pillars, whether it's cost management policy, and that could be it's looking at a budget for resource groups, or maybe it's a setting up a specific VMs in specific regions can't be set up or can't be created so that we're not accidentally spinning up a VM with 128 compute cores on accident and creating a very large spend and waiting till we catch it. But we're saying, hey, we have no business spinning up this level of VM, and we can add that to our policy. Azure Cost Management, again, getting that insight into what your cost is, and that's where leveraging AMS Portal can even take that to another level of cost management and setting up the budgets. Azure Advisor, making recommendations for your VMs to maybe it's over allocated VMs or reserved instances or Azure hybrid benefits. And then in security, again, establishing policy and blueprints and making sure that you're from a base configuration, your policy and blueprints cover your security baseline. But then in addition, you can go into Security Center and get security recommendations, recommendations of patching or anything like that. And then Azure Sentinel is the Azure native SIEM for actually monitoring security incidents or risks within the environment. Again, resource consistency, you have your policy and blueprints, but then in addition, you have Azure Monitor, so understanding workloads and actual usage within the environment. In Azure Advisor, again, making recommendations for any of your configurations or resources within the environment. Identity baseline, the real big one here is going to be leveraging Azure AD and creating role-based access for the environment. Standard role-based access and really t-shirt sizing groups of users into certain levels of access is going to be absolutely critical in a mature governed environment. And then the deployment acceleration. So this is where you can leverage resource groups and tagging conventions Azure template manager, and really creating deployable groups of resources and automation to deploy new resources rather than manually deploying resources. So those are the different native tools. Now, what I want to dive into is the Coretek AMS tool and how it actually leverages some of the Azure native tools, some of our own scripted processes into giving you a single pane of glass to really understand what is happening in your environment from all 5 pillars of governance. So we can see security recommendations, we have resource recommendations, we have cost optimization recommendations. You can look at role-based access and what user groups different Azure users, AD users are a part of. And then also we have the ability for automated deployments right from our tool into your existing subscription. So to give you a view, again, we're going to dive into this tool right now, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but this is the Coretek Azure Management Suite, and we like to call it an Azure Financial Management Governance and Automation tool. So I will dive into that. So for our CSP customers, they get access to this tool at no additional charge as part of being in our CSP. And it is coretekams.com for our Azure customers. And you can click login, and I auto log in. So I'm going to be showing an internal tenant of Coretek's today. So you'll see some of the areas are not necessarily completely filled out. This is a dev test environment. And some of those areas are, I guess, less mature than a production environment may show, but you'll see exactly what we're looking at from the different angles. So from the dashboard view here, right off the bat, we're able to see our current month-to-date spend for Azure resources and our projected month-to-date, or our projected monthly spend. So this is looking at our current month of February. There's about a 30-hour delay, so we're seeing through the end of the 15th right now for consumption. So right now we're tracking maybe about a 12-hour delay for resources, and we're seeing $940 through the 15th and projected spend of $1,748. So in our table here, the blue is our current month-to-date spend. The orange is projected spend, and the red line here is the budget. Now, obviously, this budget doesn't line up accurately for our month-to-date spend at the moment, but we can adjust and play with that budget. What we can also do is click into these and really get an idea of what our average daily cost is for this environment, as well as our actual daily cost, and kind of see the wave go up and down based on resource utilization. So bring that back. Oops. So back to our original view. So in addition to our current month of February that we're looking at, we can actually get a historical understanding of where this month stacks against previous months. And much like we're able to click off different resources and different aspects of the bill, we can do the same here. So we can really focus on what resources are variable month to month and changing, and align what those align to. So we can see that virtual machines in November created $95 of our bill, and so far, or in January, sorry, they created $15 of our bill. So we definitely turned down some VMs in this dev test environment from November till now. And you get a great view of just historically what your Azure bill has been. Getting into license subscriptions. So these are Office licenses that are purchased from Coretek in your tenant. and we can see the total number purchased, the surplus. So these are licenses that you're paying for, but aren't necessarily assigned or using. A number of organizations I work with like to keep that as close to zero as possible because they don't want to overspend. Some organizations, because they're constantly adding and removing users, or they just want a license or two in surplus so they can easily add those, and that just from a business perspective, it makes more sense for them to pay that additional $15 or $20 depending on the license per month than have to request it, if they're spinning up and spinning down users all the time. Assigned shows the number of users that are assigned with that license, and then suspended would show any licenses that you previously had acquired but are no longer paying for, would show up in the suspended section. Resource recent history. So this is a change log of changes within the Azure environment over the last 5 days. And you can expand the view of that. Obviously, this environment isn't showing a whole lot of change in the last couple days. So there's no data showing here, but in an environment that is currently being worked and active, it will show you the change log of the last couple days with the resource name that was changed, what was done, which user made the change, user account made the change, and the date it was made on. Security Center tasks, these are recommendations from the Security Center as far as what you should be doing, security advisory around maybe there's an urgent patch, or maybe a machine hasn't been patched in 60 days. So it's making recommendations from the last 7 days that have shown up in this the Azure Advisory or Azure Security Center, sorry. Similarly, on the Azure Advisory side, these are the Azure Advisory recommendations that it is making over the last 7 days for the environment. So we can actually click and expand and see a number of them. Now, what you're able to do from here is you'll notice this little ticket. You can actually, if you need help setting this up, you can click that ticket and it will create a request with Coretek, our managed service team, or our CSP support team, depending on if you're a managed service customer. And you can actually open up a ticket and request, and we'll reach out to you and see what about this, or you can add details to it on what you would like Coretek to assist with. One other thing at the top here that I missed on the first was it gives you your Azure Advisory score as well as your M365 secure score right on the front page, and shows you where you stack. So for this customer, or this tenant, sorry, we don't have any Office licenses, so that's why it's not showing a score for M365. Going into users and licenses, so this is where we can actually get an idea of users and role-based access, so we can actually see what access members have to the environment. We can see the users. You can click into a user and actually see what licenses, again, this isn't a production environment, but what licenses that user may have associated to their account, or what groups that user would be a part of. And as well as role definitions of what the different roles provide access to. Subscriptions. So this is where you can actually, when we look at that budget at the front, we can see that that budget is associated to this subscription and what it's set at. So if we wanted to change the budget for our Azure Stack Demo Microsoft Azure subscription, we could jump into that subscription here, and maybe we update the budget from $500 to $1,600. And I get a notice that the subscription update was sent, and it should get a confirmation here in a minute, and everything will update. Our budget we'll see here in a couple seconds will go from the 500 up to the 1,600. So our budget is now updated, and when we get set up reporting or notifications, it will report for the subscription to that $1,600 number. Additionally, we can actually go into our licenses that we have within the tenant, and we can show that this license, Azure Active Directory Premium, P1, I can suspend that license or keep it active, and I can also change the quantity to whatever I may need. So when we talk about having left unused or over allocating licenses to a tenant, you can actually correct and put in the number that you would like for your environment. So if you have if you need 5 and you had 1, you can bump it up to 5, hit submit. I'm not going to, because it will actually procure those additional 4 licenses. But you can actually do that on your own without even opening up a ticket. Support is a place for you to review all your support tickets with Coretek. So any incidents, any support tickets that you have with Coretek, and you can open up new and reference updates or make changes to the tickets directly from here. Now, when we talk about automation and deploying with automation, so standardized environments, Coretek has developed a catalog to help guide you through that. So you'll notice here from this view, there's a number of different resources that we can spin up from automation. Now, it's not 100% automated. We can work with you and help you achieve true automation. But because this is a little bit more generic, there are a couple items that you'll have to fill in. So when I click into spinning up a VM, it's going to just confirm which subscription I want to set up that VM for. It'll also ask me which resource group I want that VM a part of, the region, the VM name, and then creating a local account for that VM. And from here, I can then deploy. So with all of our resources that we have automated for deployments within our AMS catalog, there's a little bit of questions that it guides you through prior to deployment, just making sure that it's covering everything that you need it to as far as understanding where you're trying to deploy this and how you're trying to deploy it. A couple other areas that I really want to focus on is the notifications. So again, much like you can set budgets to the overall subscription, we can also set budgets to specific resource groups. So I can come in here and set a budget for a reoccurring. I can set it for daily, weekly, or monthly for a specific user. So I can actually punch in the user's email address, and it will let them know where their resource group spend, their actual spend is in comparison to their budget. Or I can do it on event and say when they hit 75% of their budget, send them a notification. In addition to 75%, I want them to know when it's at 90% and also when they've achieved 100% of their budget. Send them that notification, and you can have multiple receivers of that notification. So a great tool for helping your team understand where they're at for consumption. If we're diving into consumption utilization, we can actually go down to the resource level and understanding what's creating that consumption. And we can break it down into tagging groups, resource categories, so types of resources in Azure, or resource groups, and actually see which resource groups and what resources are creating the most spend, and dive into a day-by-day consumption for that resource. I know we're running low on time, so I just want to hit a couple more quick things here. So under governance is where you can really dive into the activity logs of changes within the environment. And then the other one is going to be under security, and you can look at all of your Azure Advisor recommendations, security recommendations for the environment for in M365 if you have Microsoft licensing with us as well. So this is kind of an at-a-glance view of the Azure Management Suite, and really focusing on the different areas that help you monitor and achieve governance within Azure. Again, it doesn't replace those cloud-native tools, but it's giving you a single pane of glass on managing and monitoring those cloud-native tools for achieving governance. At this point in time, Kevin, I want to send it over for any additional questions that may have popped up.
Yeah, so no questions at this time through chat, but remember you can still get those in. But we do have a couple of just like sort of common questions that often pop up when we're talking about Azure governance and AMS that will probably be a good thing to cover here, Robert. So I know one of those questions we typically get is around budget alerting, and can you do budget alerting through Azure native tools?
Yeah, so inside Azure Monitor and with the Azure native tools, they have allowed for budget alerting and reporting. From what I've seen, the AMS tool makes it a lot easier to manage that budget. So like I said, you can go right into notifications and go directly to the resource group. So for example here, I could go into this Coretek CSP resource group, click on details, and dive into what I want the alert percent set to, or who gets that alert. So it just makes it very, very easy for setting up that alerting.
Fantastic.
In addition, sorry, the one thing I think I skipped over was setting up the budget, the actual budget for those resource groups. And that is done through reports in resource groups. And I can come in here and see what our budget is. So some of these resource groups already have budgets set to them. And it also shows me where the monthly spend is for that resource.
Great. Second question is just around, is Coretek AMS available for government tenants?
Yes, tenants. So yeah, great question. Yes, it is. So what we were showing was the general Azure Public Coretek AMS view today. So for anybody that is in our Azure Global CSP, this is the portal that they would use, coretekams.com. We also have a government portal separate from the Coretek AMS portal. So it looks and behaves the exact same, but it is specific for our Azure Gov customers.
Fantastic. And last question is just, can you control multiple subscriptions or tenants with Coretek AMS?
Yes. So what we're able to do, and if you're a SaaS provider that has either a tenant by customer or a subscription by customer, however you or whatever scenario would create multiple tenants for you or subscriptions for you, we're able to create what we have is like a parent-child relationship between those tenants. So you can actually log in with one set of creds. Maybe it's associated to your primary AD, because this login authenticates against your AD, and we bring in those other tenants under a child relationship. And in this top right corner, you'll notice that it says select customer. That would be similar for you if you had separate tenants, and it would show you your different tenants that you might have. So you'll see a number of these are duplicates for specific customers. And then the other, that's for tenants. Now for subscriptions, you can actually see the different subscriptions in here. So for this tenant, we have 2 Azure subscriptions. And when you get into the utilization, you can actually bounce between those subscriptions right here.
Fantastic. Well, I know we've gone over a little bit here, but there's a lot of really great information I think you provided today, Robert. And so, with that, no other questions coming through the Q&A. So I just want to thank everybody who took the time to attend in person today for the webinar. As mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending out a copy of the slide deck as well as a recording so that you can view this if you weren't able to join today. Robert, want to thank you for taking the time for joining us today and presenting everything. I hope everyone is going to find it super helpful, because I know our AMS tool is pretty unique. And the question around Azure governance and making sure you're maintaining costs and all that good stuff, I think it's really a unique thing. So just want to thank you for taking the time and joining us today and sort of showing us some of the unique features about it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. And we will be having another webinar later on this week on Thursday, taking a look at cost optimization management when it comes to or cloud cost optimization. That's this Thursday. And Chris Shalda, who is another regular on our Tech Tuesday webinars, he will be leading that one. And then we also have another webinar next week with Jim Hunter, our CISO, and I believe either Glenn Davis or Ryan Hinkelman will be joining that as well, taking a look at SASEs, SASEs. So if you haven't already signed up for those, be on a lookout for those invites and make sure you sign up for those. Thank you again, everybody, and we will catch you during the next webinar. Bye-bye.